Living radical brilliance is not only a matter of getting coached and adopting practices and coming on retreats. It requires a deep and fundamental shift of values. You probably recognize this by now. It's the brilliance cycle. Radical brilliance means that we allow things to rise out of stillness. There is a part of the cycle which we call awakening, which is that part of the cycle where we relax into consciousness without boundaries, into something beyond the usual confines of the mind. And we learn to relax and hang out as that, enough that it can begin to vibrate and warm up. And those finest impulses of vibration become brilliant thoughts, become waves of creative brilliance that are not coming exactly from us as an individual, they're coming through us. It's a way of relaxing into the natural effervescence, the natural bubbling, which is inherent within the nature of consciousness itself. Those little impulses become, they grow in intensity, they become intention, the intention becomes action, the action becomes results in the world, becomes brilliant contributions to the world. But this requires taking an incredibly deep stand against the values on which we've been raised, particularly the values which have dominated enterprise, from which we have the word entrepreneur, someone who is involved in enterprise, free enterprise. The principles that have dominated work and business of enterprise go actually completely against this model. One of the sets of values that we are obliged to take a stand against is the Puritan work ethic, which, of course, it's inherent within our religious frameworks. It was inherent within the Puritans who came over from England to America, but it's also inherent within the way the Industrial Revolution works, and since then the technological revolution, which really it's based in the idea that you get results by working hard, by pushing hard, by stressing yourself, by exhausting yourself, by committing yourself completely to something and just giving everything, which involves a kind of almost a philosophy of depleting yourself. That's how you create results. You work hard, you get results. Well, there is some truth to it. You do need to focus and work hard. However, that value set means the harder you work, the more you push, the more you strive, the more results you're going to get. And of course, that ethic, it denies our essential nature as playful. Not only playful like a child, but playing with the big force that gives us life. Children, are naturally playful. We were all at one time children. We knew how to play. We knew how our activity could be playful, could be joyful. Last year, my wife had the good fortune to visit the Achwa tribe, deep, deep, deep within the Amazon jungle. They had their first contact with civilization, as we call it, about a generation ago, about 30 years ago. They are still connected with playfulness. They're still connected with life as a play in the way that animals play, not as work, not as long hours of work. It's really certainly since the agricultural revolution, and even more so since the industrial revolution, that we've lost our capacity to play, for life to be danced instead of to be working. We've lost our capacity, and consequently, we have values of pushing and effort and striving. The brilliance cycle involves a completely different principle, that you learn to relax and to wait and to allow things to bubble within you. And they bubble at the beginning just like a just like a melody carried on the wind from far away. You can faintly hear it, but as it grows in you, through your patience and stillness, as it grows in you and becomes more definite, all the time you stepping out of the way, as it builds in its intensity, it finally reaches the place where it can become intention. And then you surrender yourself and commit yourself to that intention, which all the time came through you and not from you. So, in a striving-based, effort-based value system, resting in emptiness has almost no value at all. The power in stillness is overlooked. To return to that naturalness where things can flow through you requires a fundamental change of values, where we value no thing above something. You see, no thing has more power than something, which is actually very similar to the principles of quantum mechanics, where in quantum physics, the unified field is the infinite source of energy. As it becomes, so at the atomic level, at the subatomic level, there's infinite amounts of energy. As matter becomes more condensed, it also has, it no longer has the energy available at the quantum level. The other value set that radical brilliance really challenges is the way in which we try and fill an unidentified gaping hole within ourselves with something from the outside. And of course, one of the most popular ways culturally to do that is through the pursuit of money. The idea that if you just get more and more and more money, the more money you get, the more fulfilled you'll feel. By now, this has been completely debunked by all kinds of sociological studies, where it's been proven quite categorically that the movement from 2 million to 3 million a year, for example, is not an increase of well-being. It's actually, in many cases, a decrease in well-being. But the idea that we can fill an unnamed gaping hole with money or with sex or with power or with fame means that we overlook the value of being still, the value of being still and waiting and being danced instead of taking action. So when I coach people, I've noticed that people who get really the greatest results, there are people I've coached who are like unrecognizable. After some months, they're not the same person at all. And that's not so much to do with what I say to them in the coaching sessions. It's not so much to do with their effective, skillful strategy at closing deals, or it's almost entirely to do with practice. The people who get the most value from coaching, the people who get the most value from working in groups or working in the one-week laboratories, almost everything that they get from practice. And the practice is mostly to do with learning how to inhabit this whole cycle, learning how to rest in states of stillness, of emptiness, of something that transcends the sense of me completely enough that that vibration can start and can amplify and can become more pronounced. So my job in coaching people and teaching is not to do the work for them. In fact, what I do on its own wouldn't really have any effect at all. My job is simply to help people change their values. To change their value set from one that makes effort and striving and doing and achieving predominant, to shift from one that makes acquisition, getting money or fame or power from the external world predominant, to a value set which places emptiness, resting, stillness, and waiting as predominant. If I can help someone to shift their value set, that shift in values is what makes practice the most important value. It makes practice and changing your state of consciousness the supremely important thing. And it's out of the practice, actually, that the results come. I've been fortunate, to have this validated so deeply. I did 420 interviews with incredibly brilliant people whose lives are just overflowing with a sense of contribution, fulfillment, of gratitude, where money flows but easily and effortlessly, where relationships are playful, where you have plenty of energy and good health into old age. But there was always at the essence this key of waiting and following an impulse that grows in intensity and that becomes a contribution. One of my favorite examples at the moment is my friend Bharat Mitra, who I've known for about 30 years. We lived together in India with our teacher, H.W.L. Punja, who's sometimes known as Papaji. And Bharat Mitra, when I met him back then, he was a long-haired, bearded Israeli hippie. All he cared about was being with our teacher, Punjaji, meditating. He was a meditating hippie, basically. But so deeply immersed in that kind of practice that he became very finely tuned to the impulses that arose within him. And so it was on one occasion that he felt commanded by a force bigger than his own mind to connect with one Indian farmer in Lucknow who was growing using chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And Bharat Mitra persuaded this farmer, who was not doing well, to go organic, to basically rid his farm of chemicals. Of course, this took a little time, but the farmer actually shifted over to organic, and Bharat Mitra helped him to remain profitable. This then grew a few years later to 8 farmers. That has now become the company Organic India, which sells organic produce farmed in India in 36 countries. It now involves 5,000 or 6,000 farmers. But it's fascinating to talk to Bharat Mitra, who's still kind of a hippie, really. He's still got really long hair and a beard, and he's still basically a mystic hippie, But he's a mystic hippie whose company has gone in 20 years from nothing to $200 million. But he didn't do it. He's very, very clear he didn't do it. He simply relaxed, became sensitive to the impulse that was commanding him and followed it. He's someone I know quite well now. He's not primarily interested in acquiring anything. He's not very interested in having a lot of money, or he's certainly not interested in fame. In fact, it's hard to even find him on the internet. He is really interested in surrendering to that impulse that comes from beyond the mind and being a servant to it. So it's a mystic. It's a mystic who is changing the face of farming in India, and it's now spreading to other countries too. And he's involved in many, many enterprises in the same way. I've seen this with so many people. My friend John Gray, who I wrote the book Conscious Men with, who also wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, he's primarily a meditator. He's primarily someone who loves meditation. A few weeks ago, he wanted my son to call him. I said, okay, I can arrange that. He wanted my son to help him with something. And then John said, but tell him to call after 2 o'clock. I said, okay. He said, because before that I'm meditating. I said, really? Until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, what time do you start? He said, about 6 in the morning. From 6 a.m. till 2 p.m., that's 8 hours he's meditating. Then he has a few hours of activity. And he's always been like that. His greatest love is dissolving. His greatest love is melting like a dewdrop into the ocean and merging with that. And out of that spaciousness, out of that infinity, any impulse that you pay attention to, that you allow to grow with you, becomes thousands, millions of times more powerful than impulses come from individuated doing. I could talk also about my wife, Shamali, who hardly appears to work at all. She spent the last month since she's been home going to the river and sitting in stillness by the river. she, as you may know, she's extremely influential in the world and very successful with awakening women, but it doesn't come out of effort or striving. She's often said, I'm allergic to stress. She said, I'm allergic to stress. I can't do anything that even begins to remotely smell of stress. I have to just say no. As soon as something starts to feel like effort, I have to say no. And it's from that deep relaxation and that surrender and obedience to the command of something very still inside of you that all of this happens very effortlessly. Lynn Twist is the same. I could list people all day like this whose primary allegiance is to that finest impulse, but that allegiance to that finest impulse is immensely more successful than directly trying to create results in the world. You align with that infinite source of energy through practice, through daily repeated practice, an hour or two each day, but also regularly going on longer retreats from the world where you can actually wash yourself clean of all this incessant busyness enough to break through the gaps between things and find that energy again. So this happens through practice, but there's no motivation to practice until there is first a change of values, a fundamental change of values where we can value nothing as more important than any one thing. We can value resting as nothing as more important than something. We can value not doing anything as more powerful than any particular action. This fundamental change of values it rocks your world so completely, because you realize that almost every assumption we've made about success and achievement and a meaningful life have been built on quicksand. And the real fundamental cause of a rich life has to do with something completely beyond our understanding and beyond our capacity to do from a localized, individualized place.